The dining room of the Shen family estate had always smelled the same polished mahogany, chrysanthemum tea, and the faint trace of power that old money tends to leave behind on every surface it touches. 12 seats are on a table, crystal glasses catching the chandelier light. White roses ranged in a vase so tall it could conceal a secret. Elena Shen, formerly Elena Marsh, sat at the far end of that table, 8 months pregnant. Back straight, hands folded in her lap, the way her mother had once taught her when she was 7 years old. Sit like you belong, her mother had said. Even when they make you feel like you don't. Single quotes. She had worn the blue dress tonight, the silk one, the color of still water. The one Marcus had once said made her look like a painting. She had taken 40 minutes to stand in front of the mirror, turning sideways, touching her own belly gently, trying to feel beautiful in a body that no longer recognized itself. She had tried. Marcus sat at the other end of the table, and he was not looking at her. He was laughing. Not the quiet, controlled laugh she knew. Not the laugh from early in their marriage when something genuinely surprised him. This was a looser laugh. The kind that only surfaces when a man feels entirely comfortable, entirely safe, entirely certain he will not be challenged. His mother, Vivian Shen, sat to his left and was laughing to a delicate sound, like porcelain tapping porcelain. His father, Raymond, was not laughing, but he was smiling. The smile of a man who has already made a decision, and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. And then Marcus said it. He set down his chopsticks. He reached forward and poured his own wine. He didn't pour hers, he hadn't poured hers all evening. And he looked at his mother, not at Elena. And he said, in a voice that carried effortlessly across the long, still table, I've already spoken with the lawyers. The papers will be ready by Thursday. The room went quiet. And Elena, 8 months pregnant, silk dress, hands in her lap, felt the blood leave her face so quickly the room tilted. She looked at him. He still did not look at her. Marcus. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Just his name. Just one word. Like a door she was trying to hold open with a single hand. He finally turned. And what she saw in his eyes was not cruelty. Exactly. It was something worse than cruelty. It was indifference. The look a man gives something he has already finished with. The arrangements are reasonable, he said, still calm, still holding his wine glass. You'll be comfortable. The baby will be provided for. His mother brought a linen napkin to the corner of her lips. His father looked at his reflection in the window. No one at that table, not one person spoke for Elena. She stood up slowly. She did not cry. She would not cry here, in this room, in front of these people who had never once looked at her like she truly belonged. She pressed her palm flat against the lower curve of her belly, a habit she had developed in the 7th month, a reflex. As though her hand could cover the baby the same way a coat covers you in wind. And she walked out of the dining room, through the marble corridor, past the white roses that smelled of nothing alive, and out through the front door. Into the rain. It had been raining for 3 hours. The kind of cold, quiet November rain that doesn't announce itself, it simply settles, it soaks, it finds every place you forgot to cover. She stood on the top step of the estate's entrance, heels still on, and let it come. And then she did something no one at that table expected. She reached into her purse. She found her phone. She made a call. What happened next would not only end Marcus Shen's marriage, it would end his empire. But first you need to understand who Elena Marsh really was before she became his wife. And more importantly, who she was quietly becoming while he was busy looking away. Elena Marsh grew up in a narrow yellow house on the edge of a town called Weller, Ohio, the kind of town that doesn't appear on most maps but exists in the memory of everyone who ever left it. Her father was an accountant who loved jazz piano. Her mother taught elementary school and kept the garden so full of color in the summer months that neighbors would slow their cars to look at it through the fence. It was not a wealthy childhood, but it was a warm one. Elena graduated top of her class in high school, earned a partial scholarship to Haverford University, worked the rest of her way through with 2 part-time jobs and a stubborn pride she inherited directly from her mother's side. She studied finance and economics. She was the kind of student professors remembered not because she spoke loudest, but because when she did speak, she had already thought the thing through completely, 3 levels deeper than anyone else. In the room. By 24, she was working as a junior analyst at a boutique investment firm in Philadelphia. By 26, she had been promoted twice and was managing accounts worth more than her childhood home. Neighborhood combined. She had a small apartment with a window that faced east, a coffee machine she loved and reasonably, and a life that felt, for the first time, entirely her own. She met Marcus Shen at a charity gala in the spring of her 27th year. He was 33 then, tall, composed, the kind of man who wears a dark suit like it was constructed specifically around his posture. He was the second-generation heir to Shen Capital, or real estate and development firm his father, Raymond, had built from a single construction contract in 1989 into a portfolio worth close to $2 billion. Marcus had gone to Wharton, had done a stint in private equity, and had returned to take over the family company at 30 with enough competence to reassure his father and enough ambition to make his own mark. He had charm, not the loud, performative charm of men who need to be noticed, but the quieter, more dangerous kind, the kind that made you feel, when he gave you his full attention, that you were the only interesting person in a room full of people. He gave Elena his full attention. That night. They talked for 2 hours. She had expected him to be another version of the wealthy men she had watched from across conference room tables, the ones who listened only long enough to find a pause to speak into. But Marcus surprised her. He asked about her work and then listened carefully to her answer. He remembered a detail she mentioned early in the conversation and referenced it an hour later. Seamlessly. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that caught her off guard twice. By midnight, when the gala began its slow wind down, she found herself not wanting the conversation to end. He called 3 days later. She answered on the second ring and then spent the rest of the day quietly annoyed at herself for not waiting longer. Their early courtship moved the way good stories do, was slowly building, each chapter revealing a little more. Sunday mornings with newspapers and coffee at a diner near his office. Long walks through Rittenhouse Square when the weather allowed. A weekend trip to Cape Cod in September where it rained the entire first day and they stayed inside the rented cottage playing cards, which turned into a 4-hour conversation about their families, their fears, the things they wanted out of a life. Elena remembered lying on the floor of that cottage, both of them stretched out on their backs, ceiling above, sound of rain on the roof, and feeling something she could only describe as safety. Not the absence of uncertainty, just the feeling that whoever she was, it was enough for this person beside her. She was, in those months, completely herself with him. What she did not yet fully see, or perhaps chose not to see, the way we do, with the people we are falling for, were the small, quiet cracks, the way Marcus would change, subtly, in the presence of his parents. The ease in his shoulders would tighten, the warmth in his face would pull back, like someone dimming a light. On his father Raymond especially, Marcus became a slightly different man. More formal, more measured, more careful. Elena noticed it but attributed it to normal family dynamics, to the pressure of a son trying to earn a complicated father's approval. She understood that pressure. She had her own version of it. The first time she met his mother, Vivian served tea and smiled at Elena with the kind of smile that is technically an expression of welcome but functions more like a measurement. She asked about Elena's family, her background, her hometown, her father's profession. Each answer produced a small, polished nod, a nod of a woman cataloging information, not connecting with it. Elena drove home that evening with a quiet, an easy feeling she could not name. She did not mention it to Marcus. He seemed so happy that evening, so genuinely pleased that the 2 women he cared about had met. She did not want to introduce doubt into his happiness. She filed the feeling away. There were other things she filed away. The time Marcus mentioned, offhandedly, over dinner, that his parents had always expected him to marry someone from within their social circle, an old family, an established name. He said it lightly, laughed it off as old-fashioned thinking. Elena laughed too, filed it away. The time Vivian called Marcus while they were on a vacation in Florence, and Marcus took the call outside the restaurant and came back 20 minutes later quieter than before, and Elena asked what was wrong and he said nothing. family business, and changed the subject with a smoothness that she had, by then, come to recognize as practiced. The time he introduced her to a colleague at a company event and used the phrase "my girlfriend." Elena, nothing unusual in those words, except that the colleague had looked faintly surprised, and Marcus had laughed and moved on. And Elena had spent the car ride home trying to understand the source of her own discomfort. Without quite reaching it, she filed it away. She was good at that. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in April, their own version of romantic, which was to say, understated. No restaurant, no stage moment. He had cooked dinner at his apartment, one of the 3 dishes he actually knew how to make well. And they had eaten at his small kitchen table with candles. And afterward he had simply taken her hand across the table and said, with a directness that was entirely him, "I want to spend my life with you. I want to grow old having conversations like the ones we have. Will you marry me?" The ring was in his jacket pocket, and when he pulled it out she noticed his hand was shaking slightly, just slightly, and that small trembling ended her completely. She had never needed grand gestures. She had always needed proof of feeling. The shaking hand was proof enough. She said yes. The wedding was planned within 8 months. It was a compromise negotiated between 2 worlds: Elena's vision of something intimate and warm, and the Shen family's expectation of something that announced their position. In the end, it was elegant, formal, and attended by 240 people, a third of whom Elena had never met. Her father danced with her to a jazz piece he had chosen himself and cried into her hair. Her mother wore yellow and looked like sunlight. Marcus's father gave a toast that praised his son's business instincts and then, almost as an afterthought, welcomed Elena to the family. Vivian kissed her cheek at the reception and whispered, "Take care of him. Not we'll take care of you both. Just take care of him." Elena pressed that into a different file, the one she kept closed. The first 2 years of marriage were genuinely good. Not perfect, nothing true is perfect, but real, and warm, and built on a foundation that felt solid beneath her feet. She continued working at the firm, managing her accounts. Excellent at her job, growing a reputation quietly but steadily. Marcus ran Shen Capital through a significant expansion, acquiring 3 properties along the eastern seaboard and launching a new development division. They were both busy, both ambitious, both building things. They had dinner together 4 nights a week, made time on Sundays, traveled twice a year to places they chose together. She loved him. That is the important thing to hold on to. She loved him genuinely, not the idea of him, not the social position he represented, not the security of his last name. She loved him, a man who remembered small details, who got up quietly at 3 a.m. when he couldn't sleep rather than disturb her, who kept a battered copy of a John Updike novel on his nightstand for 5 years and had never once finished it, who always knew when she was upset before she said a word. She loved that man. And for a while, that man loved her back. The 3rd year was when things began to change. It started with the expansion project, specifically, the Shanghai deal. A development partnership that had the potential to double Shen Capital's international portfolio if it closed successfully. Raymond, who had stepped back from day-to-day operations but never fully released control, pushed aggressively for Marcus to pursue it. The negotiations required Marcus to travel to Shanghai 4 times in 18 months, trips that stretched from a week to 2 weeks and eventually to 3. Elena understood. She was a professional herself. She understood the demands of high-stakes business. She kept their apartment warm, their routines intact as much as possible. And when he called from Shanghai, she was always there to answer, no matter the hour, no matter the time difference. But something came back from those trips that hadn't gone with him. A guardedness, a new set of silences. Evenings when he sat looking at his phone with an expression she couldn't read, not the concentrated focus of a man reviewing a contract, but the softer, more private expression of a man attending to something personal. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself she was being insecure, irrational, the worst version of the jealous wife trope she had always disdained in others. She told herself a great many things that year, the night she found out she was pregnant, 8 weeks in, a Tuesday in March. The pregnancy test sitting on the edge of the bathroom sink like the most ordinary, extraordinary thing in the world. She stood alone in their bathroom for a long time with her hand on the wall and something so large moving through her chest that she couldn't tell if it was fear or joy or both at once. Marcus was on a call in the home office. She waited until he finished, went in, sat on the edge of his desk, and told him quietly. He looked at her for a moment, and then something shifted in his face. Something she had not seen in a very long time. He stood up, came to her, pulled her in, and held on. She felt the tension he carried everywhere leave his body for a moment. She felt him breathe. Really, he said into her hair. Just that word, really, she said. He held her for a long time that night, and in that embrace she thought she felt him come back of the man she had married, the man who trembled when he proposed, the man who was, under everything, still hers. She thought. She did not yet know about Lydia. Lydia Chen came into Elena's awareness the way dangerous things often do, not all at once, but in accumulation. A name mentioned once, quickly, brushed over. A delayed response to a text on a night Marcus was supposed to be in meetings. A faint trace of a perfume on a jacket collar, not accusatory on its own, easily explained away but present, recorded, filed. Elena was 5 months pregnant when she first said the name aloud in the form of a question. They had been getting ready for bed, the lamp on Marcus's nightstand throwing a yellow circle of light across the ceiling, and she had said it casually. The way you say something that costs you enormously, but that you're trying to make sound light. Who's Lydia Chen? She watched him. She watched his hands, specifically, a habit from years in finance, where you learn that the body tells the truth when the face has been coached to lie. His hands were holding his phone and they did not move. He was very still for exactly 2 seconds, and then he set the phone face down on the nightstand and said, "A new account manager. Why, you mentioned her name last week on the phone with David. Did I?" He reached over and turned off the lamp. "She's working on the Shanghai follow-up. Nothing interesting. Nothing interesting." She lay in the dark and listened to her own heartbeat and thought about the specific quality of a man's voice when he is telling a small, well-constructed truth that is missing the larger truth it rests inside of. She thought about it for a long time before she fell asleep. She thought about it more when, at 6 months pregnant, barely able to find a comfortable position in any chair. She came across a receipt in the pocket of Marcus's sport coat while she was organizing it for the dry cleaner, a dinner receipt, a restaurant she didn't know. A Tuesday night she remembered clearly because she had been home with back pain severe enough to call her obgyn. To people, fine wine. A bill that spoke of hours spent at a table, not a business dinner rushed between phone calls. She stood in the bedroom holding the receipt. The baby turned inside her, a slow rotation, as if acknowledging the moment. She pressed her hand to her belly. She said nothing to Marcus that night, or the night after. She did something better. She thought. Elena Marsh had built a career on reading numbers, reading patterns. Understanding that the real story was never in the single data point but in the relationship between data points across time. She was, above everything, a person who knew how to be patient, who knew how to gather information before drawing a conclusion, who understood that acting too early from emotion, from panic, from a wounded need to confront was how you lost your advantage. She gathered. She said nothing. She kept the house, their routines, her face. She asked no more questions. She was warm with Marcus, present, attentive, and quietly, methodically, she began to understand the full picture. By her 7th month, she understood enough. What she understood was this: Lydia Chen was 29 years old, a junior executive at a consulting firm that had been contracted by Shen Capital for the Shanghai project. She was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful effortlessly, casually. The kind of beauty that doesn't need a silk dress or 40 minutes in front of a mirror. She had met Marcus during the second Shanghai trip, and what had started as a professional relationship had, by the evidence Elena was carefully assembling, become something significantly different. She also understood, and this was the piece that cut deepest, clean as glass, that it was not entirely new. That Marcus and Lydia had been, at minimum, deeply entangled since before the pregnancy was announced. That the night he held her in his home office and whispered really into her hair, He had already known Lydia Chen. The timing was a knife. She did not allow herself to linger on. What she did not yet understand, what she had not been meant to understand, was the conversation that had taken place at the Shen estate 2 weeks before the day. Near that opened this story. The conversation in Raymond Shen's private study, with its leather chairs and wall of family photographs, where Raymond had looked at his son and said something Elena would only learn about later, that Lydia came from the Wang family, that the Wangs were a Shanghai-based property dynasty with whom Raymond had been quietly courting a partnership for 3 years, that a marriage between Marcus and Lydia would accomplish in a single ceremony what 2 years of business negotiations had failed to close, and Marcus, sitting in his father's leather chair, had said not immediately, not without a long silence during which Elena's entire marriage sat on a scale being weighed against a business deal, had said, "What about Elena?" And Raymond had said, "Elena is practical. She'll be taken care of." That was the full sum of her value in that room. She would be taken care of. Like a liability being written off. Like a line item in a renegotiated contract. At dinner, Elena sat through that November evening, a blue silk dress, 8 months pregnant, hands in her lap. Had not been a spontaneous explosion. It had been a scheduled execution. The lawyers had already been briefed. The papers were already drafted. The house she had made a home. Every small detail of comfort and warmth she had layered into those rooms over 4 years had already been appraised for the separation agreement. She had been the last to know what was already decided. And yet, when Marcus said, "The papers will be ready by Thursday," across the crystal and the chrysanthemum tea and the white roses that smelled of nothing alive, something shifted in the room that no one at that table was prepared for. Elena did not collapse. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She stood up. She pressed her palm to her belly. She walked out. And no one at that table, not Marcus, not Vivian, not Raymond, had the foresight to wonder what a woman like Elena Marsh had been quietly doing for the past 3 months while they were busy constructing a plan to remove her from the story. The rain had strengthened by the time Elena reached her car at the bottom of the estate's circular driveway. She hadn't run, she had walked, carefully, the way you walk when you are carrying something you cannot afford to drop. But she was soaked by the time she reached the driver's side door. And when she got in and closed the door, the silence inside the car hit her like a physical thing. She sat. She did not start the engine. The rain on the roof of the car sounded like hands touching the 1,000 small, soft contacts. Insistent but not harsh. The windows fogged slowly from the inside. The world outside turning impressionistic, blurred, the estate's lights becoming smears of amber in the dark. The perfectly trimmed hedges becoming suggestions of shape. She put both hands on the steering wheel, not to drive, just to hold something. The baby moved. It was not a kick exactly, and more of a slow, underwater shifting, a reminder of presence, of weight, of the remarkable specificity of being alive inside another life. Elena closed her eyes and felt it. She stayed with it. She breathed. "You're all right," she thought, directed inward. "We are all right." But the thought opened a door she had been carefully keeping shut. Because behind that door was everything she was choosing not to feel yet, the full inventory of what had just happened, of what had been said, of what it meant. Behind that door was the version of herself that had loved Marcus Shen without reservation, that had built a life around him with both hands, that had believed, had genuinely believed, that she was in a partnership, that they were doing this together. She had given him years. She had given him a career slowed and narrowed to accommodate his. She had turned down a position in a London office at 29 because Marcus had said, gently, that he thought they were ready to build something in Philadelphia, and she had looked at his face and believed him. She had attended every family dinner, every business event, every social obligation the Shen name required, dressed appropriately, smiled at the right moments, contributed to conversations without ever outshining, knowing instinctively the particular tightrope a woman walks in rooms built by other people's money. She had been good at that walk. She had been excellent at it. And now she sat in a car in the rain outside a house that had never fully been hers, with divorce papers arriving Thursday, and a baby who deserved none of this. She tilted her head back against the headrest. One tear tracked down the side of her face, just one, deliberate as a signature, and she let it come and then she let it go. She thought about her mother, about the yellow house in Weller, Ohio, about her mother's garden in the summer, oh, that color through the fence, and the way her mother had stood in it after Elena's father's heart attack, 6 years ago, standing in the middle of that garden the morning after, alone. And not weeping, just standing, as if she was drawing something from the roots upward, as if she was remembering what she was made of. Sit like you belong, her mother had said. Even when they make you feel like you don't. Elena had sat at that table like she belonged. Now she would need to act like it. She was not a woman without resources. This was the important thing. This was the thing she held on to as the rain continued, as the state lights burned behind the fog of the car window. As the world outside went quietly on without knowing or caring about the woman sitting in the dark trying to reassemble herself from the inside out. She was not without resources. She had been quietly, carefully, methodically ensuring that for exactly 11 weeks, the moment she had found the restaurant receipt, the moment she had held it in the bedroom and felt the baby turn, she had made a decision. Not a decision born of rage, not of panic, a decision born of the oldest, calmest instinct in human experience, the instinct of a mother who understands that the world is not fair and that survival requires preparatory. She had made calls. She had sent emails written with the particular precision of a woman who has spent her career in finance and knows exactly how language can be both specific and careful. She had accessed accounts. She had reviewed documents. She had spoken to one person, in particular, whose name she had carried in her phone as a contact for 3 years without ever needing to use it until now. A person who owed her something significant. A person who, when she called to even at an unusual hour, even in an unusual circumstance, would answer. She reached into her purse now, in the quiet and the rain. She found the phone. She scrolled to the contact. She sat with her thumb hovering over the name. Through the fogged window, a light went on inside the Shen estate, the second floor. Marcus's childhood bedroom, now his father's study. A figure moved past the window. To figures, perhaps. Planning, perhaps. Already dismantling what remained of her presence in their story. She pressed call. It rang twice. A voice answered low. Steady. Professional even at this hour. Elena. I'm ready, she said. Her voice did not tremble. I'd like to begin. There was a pause, brief. And then, I'll have everything prepared by morning. She lowered the phone. She started the engine. The windshield wipers swept the rain away in long, clean arcs. And she drove carefully, deliberately, the way she did everything, out of the Shen estate's driveway, past the iron gate, onto the wet road where the streetlights made orange pools on black asphalt, toward a future that belonged entirely to her. Marcus Shen believed he had thought of everything. He had retained one of Philadelphia's top family law firms. He had prepared a settlement he considered more than generous. He had spoken to his financial advisors about asset structuring. He had even, and this detail says everything about the kind of man he had become, prepared a statement for the company newsletter, Marcus Shen and Elena Shen are amicably separating and ask for privacy. During this time, already written, already waiting, he was, by every measure he could see from where he stood, entirely in control. But what he didn't know, what he had not thought to look for, because he had stopped truly seeing her 18 months ago, was that Elena Marsh had never simply been the woman he married. She had been, the entire time, someone far more formidable. And the call she made from a rain-soaked car on a November evening was not the beginning of her grief. It was the beginning of her return. Her name, before she became Elena Shen and before she was Elena Marsh of Weller, Ohio, was adjacent to a much larger story than anyone in the Shen family had ever bothered to investigate. Her maternal grandmother, a woman named Constance Ellery, who had died when Elena was 19 and had been a very quiet force in Philadelphia's legal and civic landscape for 30 years. Not famous in the way that invites profiles or profiles, famous in the way that matters more, known by the people who make decisions, respected in rooms that most people never enter. Constance had been a senior partner at Ellery and Webb, a boutique firm that specialized in estate law, civil litigation, and in its quieter practice. The kind of discreet financial restructuring that wealthy families occasionally require and never advertise. When Constance died, she left her partnership interest and her significant personal estate to her only grandchild Elena, in a trust structured with the kind of elegant complexity that ensured it could not be seen, challenged, or discovered by anyone who did not know to look for it. Elena had been 19 and overwhelmed and in the middle of a university application, and she had signed the papers her grandmother's attorney placed before her and understood perhaps a quarter of what she was agreeing to. The attorney, a man named Harmon Webb, Constance's former partner, 60 years old and precise as a compass, had looked at her over his reading glasses and said, "Your grandmother believed you would know what to do with this when the time came. She was very specific about that. She said she'll know when." Elena had nodded and tucked the documents away and spent the next 8 years building her own life so entirely on her own terms that she had rarely needed to look at what was held in that trust. She knew it was there. She knew its approximate value. She knew Harmon Webb's phone number by heart. Had known it since she was 19, the way you know the number of a doctor you hope you'll never need. Harmon Webb, that was the contact in her phone. That was the call she had made from the car. The trust, by the time of Elena's 29th birthday when she had married Marcus Shen, had grown through careful management to a value that would have caused significant recalibration in the Shen family's calculations had they been aware of it. But they had not been aware of it, because Elena had never spoken of it, not from secrecy, exactly, but from the same instinct that had governed Constance Ellery's entire professional life. You do not reveal what you do not need to reveal. You keep your resources private until the moment they are needed, and then you deploy them with precision. Harmon Webb, now 68 and still practicing out of the same third-floor office on Chestnut Street where he had practiced for 40 years, had been waiting for precisely this kind of call from Elena for considerably longer than she knew. He had watched her marriage to Marcus Shen with the carefully expressed neutrality of a man who has seen enough of the world to know how certain stories tend to end. He had assembled, over the years of their periodic meetings, the quarterly reviews of the trust status, the occasional legal consultation, a very clear picture of who Elena was and what she was capable of. He had also, through connections that stretched back to Constance Ellery and through the close, trusted network of Philadelphia's senior legal community, become aware of certain things about Marcus Shen and Shen Capital that Marcus himself might have been surprised to know were known. When Elena called from the car and said, "I'm ready, I'd like to begin," Harmon Webb had already been thinking about this call for 11 weeks because Elena had reached out to him by email in late August, in the careful language of a woman who wanted to explore her options without yet committing to a direction. And Harmon had understood immediately what she was not quite saying yet and had begun, quietly, to prepare. By the morning after the Shen family dinner, Harmon Webb had the following prepared and ready for Elena's review: a full accounting of the Ellery Trust, its current value, its accessible components, and its structural protections. Elena, as the trust's sole beneficiary, controlled assets that Marcus's lawyers would find not only impossible to access in a divorce proceeding but entirely invisible under the prenuptial agreement Marcus had prepared 4 years ago, which had been drafted, as Elena had quietly discovered, with an eye to protecting the Shen family's assets, not Elena's independent estate. He also had a copy of Marcus's prenuptial agreement, which Elena had signed at 29 without a lawyer of her own, something she had thought little of at the time. Something Harmon had thought a great deal about since. That agreement, as it turned out, contained a clause that Marcus's attorneys had inserted and relied upon heavily, that Elena would receive a settlement of $250,000 and vacate all claims to Shen Capital assets in the event of divorce. $250,000 for 4 years of marriage, a career partially restructured in service of his and a child. But there was another clause, one that Marcus's lawyers had included as a standard formality, a boilerplate protection they had likely not considered would ever be tested. a clause that stipulated that in the event the grounds for divorce included demonstrable fault infidelity, specifically named, the settlement structure reversed entirely. The assets became subject to equitable distribution under Pennsylvania law. Pennsylvania, which Elena knew well, being a former financial analyst with a particular interest in legal structures affecting asset management, does not look kindly on fault-based divorce when children are involved. There was also the matter of the Shanghai project specifically. The partnership agreement between Shen Capital and a consulting firm that Elena had, in her months of careful research, discovered had not been contracted through the company's standard procurement process. It had been contracted through a verbal commitment made by Marcus during the second Shanghai trip and then retroactively documented by a junior paralegal who had not been told why the proper process had been bypassed. The consulting firm, Elena now knew, was majority owned by a holding company that traced through 2 layers of incorporation back to Lydia Chen's family. This was not, by itself, a crime, but it was a significant conflict of interest that had not been disclosed to Shen Capital's board. And Shen Capital, while a private family firm, had 3 minority institutional investors who had contractual rights to disclosure of any partnership agreements above a certain value that involved conflicts of interest. Those investors had not been disclosed to. Harmon Webb had the documentation. He also had, and this was the piece Elena had not fully anticipated, the piece that Harmon had assembled through his own investigation. A signed affidavit from a former member of Shen Capital's administrative staff who had been quietly let go 6 months earlier and who had, in the course of that departure, provided a statement to an attorney she had separately retained. A statement that described, in specific and credible detail, the nature of Marcus Shen's relationship with Lydia Chen, including dates, locations, and the fact that company resources, the corporate apartment, a company car, expense accounts, had been used in the course of that relationship. Use of company resources for personal purposes, undisclosed to the board, constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. It was also a violation of the minority investors' shareholder agreement. It was, in the right hands, the kind of information that could restructure a company, a family, and a man's entire future. Simultaneously, Harmon Webb had very right hands. And, as Elena sat across from him in his Chestnut Street office the morning after the dinner, 8 months pregnant, navy coat, quiet eyes, and reviewed everything he placed before her with the focused, patient attention of a woman reading a financial report she has been expecting. She felt something settle inside her that was not vindictive and was not triumphant and was not even angry. It was clarity. The particular, cool clarity of a person who has been uncertain for a very long time and has finally, irrevocably, decided. What's the strongest move? She asked. Harmon folded his hands on the desk. In my opinion, and I've been doing this for 40 years, the strongest move is the most restrained one. We let him file. We respond with everything we have at the moment he expects you to fold. She looked at him for a moment. The board meeting. His father has called an emergency board meeting for December 15th to formalize the Shanghai partnership. Before the divorce is finalized, are trying to move assets before they become subject to scrutiny. Yes. That meeting. That's 3 weeks. Yes. Can we be ready? Harmon Webb smiled to the small, dry smile of a man who has been ready for considerably longer. We have been ready, Elena. She nodded once. She stood, pressed her palm briefly to her belly, and picked up her coat. Then let's begin, she said. The Shen Capital boardroom was on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in Center City, Philadelphia. And on the morning of December 15th it had the particular charged stillness of a room where important things were about to be formalized. Raymond Shen sat at the head of the long table, silver-haired, composed, the bearing of a man who has always been the most powerful person in every room he enters. To his left sat his legal counsel. To his right sat Marcus. Marcus looked, too, those who knew him well, like a man performing calm. His suit was impeccable. His posture was controlled. But there was something slightly tighter than usual in the set of his jaw, a quality to his stillness that read less like ease and more like containment. He had filed the divorce papers on Thursday. As promised, Elena had received them, through her attorney, with no visible reaction that had been reported back to him. She had not called. She had not appeared at the estate. She had not, as far as Marcus could tell, done much of anything except retain her own legal counsel, a name he had not recognized, an older firm, which his lawyers had described as not a major threat. He had felt, if he was honest with himself, a faint unease about her silence. Elena, in his experience, was not a passive person. Her silence during the weeks before the dinner, a silence he had attributed to her processing, to her grief, to the particular dignity she always carried even in difficult moments, now sat differently in his memory. He could not have said exactly why. He had pushed the feeling down. The three minority institutional investors were represented at the board meeting by their respective liaisons, two in person, one by video. The agenda was the formal ratification of the Shanghai Consulting Partnership Agreement, restructured under new terms Shen Capital's legal team had prepared, and several other items Raymond had included to provide reasonable cover for the specific item he actually cared about. At 9:45, the meeting was called to order. At 9:51, the door opened. Elena walked in. She was 31 days from her due date. She wore a charcoal blazer over a dark dress, and her hair was arranged with the effortless precision of a woman who has spent the morning doing something other than worrying about how she looks. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm. She moved without hurry and walked the length of the boardroom table as though she had done it 1,000 times, which she had not, and took a seat 3 chairs down from Marcus on the opposite side of the table. She looked at no one as she sat. She opened her portfolio and arranged the documents in front of her. There was a silence in the room of the specific, charged quality that occurs when something unexpected has entered a carefully controlled environment, and the people in that environment are deciding how to respond. Raymond Shen recovered first. Elena, this is a private board meeting. Yes, she said. She did not look up from her documents. I'm aware. You're not a board member or a shareholder. I'm not, she agreed calmly. Then she looked up. She found Raymond's eyes and held them with a steadiness that he, who prided himself on being unreadable, found unexpectedly difficult to match. But I am represented here by 2 of the 3 institutional investors currently seated at this table. Every head in the room turned toward the investor liaisons. Diana Pierce, the liaison for Meridian Capital, one of Shen Capital's institutional partners, cleared her throat and said, Meridian Capital has requested the right to introduce new material at this meeting relevant to Agenda Item 3. Our legal counsel, Mr. Harmon Webb of Webb and Associates, has filed the appropriate notice with the board secretary. The request was properly submitted and is on record. Marcus was very still. The third chair from him, his wife, 8 months pregnant and sitting at his board meeting with 2 of his minority investors flanking her, and a 68-year-old attorney who looked like a grandfather and thought like a surgeon, sitting quietly at the far end of the table with a closed folder and an expression of absolute professional serenity. Raymond's counsel leaned over and whispered something. Raymond's face changed, not dramatically, not obviously, but to Elena, who had spent 4 years studying this family's particular language of expression, the change was clear. He was recalibrating. He had not expected this. He had not been told. Harmon Webb opened his folder. He spoke for 23 minutes. He spoke in the precise, measured cadence of a man who has been doing this for decades and has no need for drama, because the facts, presented in proper sequence, are dramatic enough on their own. He laid out the structure of the Shanghai Consulting Partnership. He walked through the timeline of Marcus's relationship with Lydia Chen and the overlapping use of company resources, dates, amounts, account records. He placed before the board the affidavit from the former administrative staff member, properly notarized and signed. He referenced, by specific clause number, the shareholder agreement that had been violated by the non-disclosure. He then addressed the prenuptial agreement as specifically the fault clause and explained, with the particular lucidity of a legal expert speaking to non-lawyers, what the triggering of that clause would mean in the context of the divorce proceeding currently filed in Philadelphia Family Court. He paused. He turned one page. He looked up. Shen Capital currently has outstanding partnership discussions with 3 other institutional partners beyond those represented here today, he said. Two of those discussions are in preliminary stages. One is in final negotiation, the release of the information I have just presented, which, under the terms of the existing shareholder agreement, must now be disclosed to all institutional partners will, in my assessment, affect all three of those discussions significantly. Close the folder. I am prepared to present all supporting documentation to any party at this table or any regulatory body that requests it. I am also prepared, on behalf of my client, to delay that release pending an agreed resolution of the current divorce proceeding, under terms that reflect the equitable distribution to which my client is entitled under Pennsylvania law. He sat back. The room was very quiet. The video liaison for the third investor muted himself and said simply, "I'll need to consult with my principals immediately." Raymond Shen's legal counsel was writing rapidly on a legal pad, and Marcus, who had drafted a newsletter statement. Marcus, who had said the arrangements are reasonable across a dinner table at which his -1 month's pregnant wife sat with her hands in her lap. Marcus was looking at Elena. She was looking back at him. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She did not look like a woman who has won a battle, because she had never framed this as a battle. She looked the way she had always looked at her best, composed, clear-eyed, entirely herself. The way she had looked when she first met him, at a charity gala. The way she had looked when she said yes at a kitchen table. The way she had looked every day for 4 years while he had gradually, carelessly, looked away. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Vivian's voice came from behind him. She had been seated along the wall, a non-voting observer of a meeting she had assumed would be ceremonial. Marcus. Just his name. Warning. Or grief. Or both. Marcus said nothing. Raymond Shen set down his pen. He was a man who had built a $2 billion company from a single construction contract, and whatever else could be said of him, he had not done that by failing to recognize when a negotiation had shifted irrevocably. He looked at his counsel. His counsel gave a small, reluctant nod. Raymond looked at Elena. "What do you want?" he asked. Just those 4 words. No warmth. No pretense. Business. Only the reduction of his son's wife to a transaction. Even now, even here. Elena held his gaze. She reached into her portfolio and slid a single page across the table toward Harmon, who picked it up and presented it to Raymond's counsel. "That is our proposal," she said. "It's generous. It reflects what I earned and what I contributed and what my child deserves. It does not exceed that." She stood up. She gathered her documents and closed the portfolio. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, addressing the table, all of them. Investors, counsel, the man who had dismissed her from his family's table in a blue silk dress, the father who had called her a liability to be managed. "I'm here because I intend to build a life for my child that he will be proud of. I'm here because a woman who is 8 months pregnant is not someone to be removed from a story quietly on a Thursday. And I'm here because it is long past time for this family to understand accurately who they were dealing with." She looked at Marcus one final time. His face was the face of a man encountering, for the first time, the full dimensions of someone he had thought he knew completely. She looked away first, not from defeat, from completion. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She opened it, and the ordinary sounds of the 22nd floor of a phone ringing somewhere, the distant ping of an elevator came in. She did not look back. The door closed behind her. And in the boardroom of Shen Capital, on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in Philadelphia, in the 3rd week of December, there was a silence so complete and so extended that Harmon Webb, who had been doing this for 40 years and had seen many rooms go quiet in many ways, would later tell his assistant it was the most satisfying silence of his career. Her daughter was born on the 14th of January, at 7 minutes past 2 in the morning, in a delivery room at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital that smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen and summit, hang inexplicably floral from a diffuser. One of the nurses had brought in during the long hours of labor. Elena named her Constance, after the grandmother who had believed she would know when. She weighed 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She had a round face and dark hair and the particular, searching expression of a newborn that suggests they are not at all sure this world is what they signed up for and are reserving judgment. She looked at Elena from the first moment where Elena felt that she did, which amounts to the same thing. With the directness of someone who had already decided she could trust this specific person. Elena held her and felt the world recompose itself around a new center of gravity. Her mother had flown in from Ohio 3 days before the birth, had been sleeping on the fold-out sofa in Elena's new apartment. A graceful 2-bedroom in Rittenhouse Square that Elena had signed a lease on in early December, picking each piece of furniture herself, choosing colors for the nursery at midnight with paint chips spread across the hardwood floor and a cup of decaf going cold on the windowsill. The apartment was warm and entirely her own. Not a single piece of it inherited from a life she was finished with. It smelled of new paint and old wood and, eventually, the particular sweet domesticity of a newborn. Her mother held Constance while Elena slept, and told the baby things about the yellow house in Ohio, and the garden, and her great-grandmother Constance, who had been formidable in the quietest possible way. "You come from a long line of women who knew when," her mother whispered. The baby listened with her enormous new eyes. The settlement was finalized 6 weeks after the board meeting, structured along the lines of Elena's single-page proposal, and representing, as Harmon had quietly predicted, a significantly more generous outcome than the $250,000 Marcus's original lawyers had considered reasonable. The Ellery Trust remained entirely untouched or protected by its structure, invisible to the opposing counsel. Exactly as Constance had arranged it 30 years before, with the specific foresight of a woman who understood that protection, like preparation, is most valuable when it is never needed. Marcus retained controlling interest in Shen Capital but agreed to a full disclosure to the minority investors, a process that resulted in 2 of the 3 institutional partnerships requiring renegotiation, and the Shanghai Consulting Agreement being restructured without the Chen family involvement. The company did not collapse. Raymond Shen would not have permitted that, but it was a smaller, chastened, more carefully governed version of itself going forward, under the watch of a board that now had considerably more documentation requirements than before. Lydia Chen, for her part, had already moved on by February, of a fact Elena learned from Harmon, who had learned it through channels Elena didn't need to know, and which she received with exactly the amount of emotion it deserved. None. Marcus called once, in late February. Elena was sitting in the apartment with Constance asleep against her chest, evening light coming through the east-facing window, the coffee machine going in the kitchen. She saw his name on the phone and sat with it for a moment. She did not answer. Not from bitterness. She wanted to be clear about that, clear within herself, which is the only place it matters. She did not hate Marcus Shen. Hate required a sustained attention to someone that Elena was no longer willing to give. She had understood what he had chosen and why, and what that said about who he ultimately was, and she had processed it with the same thorough patience she brought to every complex problem. And she had come out the other side of it not with bitterness but with something more useful. Knowledge. The specific, irreplaceable knowledge of her own value. Earned the hard way, which no one could ever again make her doubt. She did not answer because she had nothing left to say to him. And she had learned from Constance Ellery, from her mother, from her own long years of being in rooms where she was underestimated, that the most powerful thing a woman can sometimes do is simply decline to continue. She set the phone down. She put her hand gently on the sleeping weight of her daughter. The coffee machine finished. The evening light moved. She thought about the rain, that November night, the car, the fogged windows. The choice between sitting in the grief and making the call. She had made the call. She thought about what it had cost her, because this is the part of these stories that is often left out. The part that gets replaced with triumph and satisfaction, and the satisfying vision of a powerful man encountering his comeuppance. It had cost her something real. She had loved Marcus Shen genuinely, and the loss of that love, or rather, the loss of the person she had believed him to be, had been a genuine grief. The kind that doesn't resolve in a courtroom or a boardroom, but only very slowly, in the quiet hours, in the particular ache of remembering what you thought you had and recalibrating to what was actually there. Grief is not weakness. She knew that. Her mother had taught her that in a garden in Ohio after her father died. You stand in the middle of it. You let it come. You stay. She had stayed. And now here she was at 32 years old, a new apartment, a daughter named after a grandmother who had believed in her from the beginning. A trust her own grandmother had structured 30 years ago with the specific faith that Elena would know when. A career she was already rebuilding carefully, on her own terms this time, with no adjustments made for anyone else's comfort or anyone else's vision of who she should be. There was a new position. She had been approached in November, before the dinner, before the rain, before any of it, approached by a firm that had been watching her career for 3 years and wanted her for a senior role that would use every skill she had spent the last decade building. She had deferred the conversation during the chaos of the divorce and the board meeting and the final weeks of the pregnancy. She had returned to it in February, when Constance was 6 weeks old and sleeping in longer stretches, and she had sat across from the hiring partners with the same clear, unafraid directness she had brought to a boardroom on December 15th. And they had offered her a compensation package that made the career narrowing of her 20s feel like a story from someone else's life. She had accepted. She had signed the offer letter in the evening, at the kitchen table, Constance and a bouncer on the floor beside her making the specific focused expression that meant she was working out something deep and private about the universe. Elena had signed her name Elena Marsh, the name she was returning to. The name that had always been entirely her own, and then she had sat back and looked at her daughter and felt something she was still learning the full dimensions of. Vindication, not triumph, not the satisfaction of having bested someone, freedom, just that, plain, warm, and complicated freedom. The kind that only comes when you have been entirely honest with yourself about what you lost and what you kept, and you have made peace with the accounting. She thought about the women who would watch a story like hers, are the ones who sat with a cup of tea or a glass of wine in the quiet part of the evening, and houses where they were sometimes seen and sometimes not, where they were sometimes valued for the full weight of what they gave and sometimes not. The ones who recognized in Elena's story the specific texture of a particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of a woman who has built everything alongside someone, and then discovered she built it mostly alone. The ones who knew what it is to file something away and file something away until the files are too heavy to carry. You know when, she thought. You will know when, on the 1st of March. Elena Marsh walked into her new office for the first time. She wore a deep blue blouse, a different blue from the silk dress, a color she had chosen herself from nothing but what pleased her, and she carried Constance's photograph in her wallet and her grandmother's strength in her spine and 47 gigabytes of hard-won self-knowledge in every cell of her body. She sat down at her desk. The window faced east. The coffee machine was on the credenza. It was, she thought, a very good beginning. Elena Marsh never forgot the rain. She did not forget it because forgetting would be a kind of erasure, and she was not interested in erasing the parts of her story that had hurt. She kept them. She looked at them honestly and regularly, the way you look at a scar, not to nurse it, not to show it off, but to remember that the skin beneath it had healed stronger than it had been before. She sometimes thought about Constance. Ellery, not the grandmother she had known, but the young woman her grandmother must have been, navigating her own version of a world that was not always inclined to see a woman's full capacity. She thought about the trust her grandmother had built and protected and left waiting for exactly the right moment, like a letter sealed and set aside for a future self that hadn't arrived yet. She'll know when. There is something worth saying, before this story closes, about what it means to be the kind of woman who waits. In a world that celebrates speed, force, immediacy, the kind of power Elena exercised, careful, patient, thoroughly prepared, quietly assembled over weeks and months in the small private hours, is often misunderstood as passivity, as softness, as the absence of strength. It is the opposite. Patience is not the same as powerlessness. Silence is not the same as surrender. The woman who does not raise her voice in the moment of humiliation, who instead presses her hand to her belly and walks out with her back straight, is not retreating from the moment. She is choosing her moment. She is deciding when. There is also something worth saying about the rain, about November rain, specifically cold and quiet and indifferent, about what it means to walk into it without cover, to be soaked to the Skin outside a house where someone has just reduced your 4 years to a legal line item. About what it means to sit in a car alone with your hand on the steering wheel while your child turns inside you and the world behind the fog glass goes on without knowing your name. Those moments are not dramatic in the way of boardrooms or courtrooms or power reveals. Those moments are not watched by anyone. There is no crowd reaction. No chandelier catching the light at the right angle. No perfectly timed revelation. Those moments are just you, and the rain, and the choice of what to do next. And yet those moments are the whole thing. Those moments are where every other moment is decided. Elena Marsh made her choice in the rain. And in doing so, she did not just change her own story. She remembered who she had always been. If this story moved you, if you saw in Elena something of yourself, or someone you love, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're in your own quiet rainy night moment right now, your own car, your own fogged window, your own impossible choice, know that you will know when. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.